In the heart of Seattle's Capitol Hill district, there's a narrow stretch of sidewalk that locals often describe as smelling like cardamom and rain. It's where the Golden Curry House stood, a modest 15-table Indian restaurant run by Arjun Mehta, a man whose reputation went far beyond the food he served. For more than a decade, Arjun had been the quiet center of that place. His regulars said they could set their watches by his habits: the first to unlock the door in the morning, the last to lock up at night. He wore the same crisp white chef's jacket every shift, sleeves rolled to the elbows, and always carried that faint aroma of turmeric on his hands, no matter how many times he washed them. That Tuesday night in August of 2016 began like hundreds before it. The summer air was humid, and the city's traffic noise softened as you stepped inside the warm saffron-painted dining room. It was just past 7 when the dinner rush hit full stride. The kitchen doors swung open and closed in a rhythm only Arjun seemed to truly understand. He worked the line with quiet precision, scanning tickets, checking plating, tasting a sauce here, adjusting the naan dough there. Outside the kitchen, he paused just long enough to greet a familiar face, maybe ask about their kids, before disappearing back behind the swinging doors. To his customers, he was simply a man doing what he loved. But that night, for reasons no one yet understood, his life was about to run out of time. At 7:14 p.m., Arjun was reviewing an order for 2 plates of his signature royal masala thali, the kind of dish he'd made thousands of times. A couple of his line cooks would later recall how he'd just finished a small taste of naan from the first batch of dough that evening. He said something about needing to adjust the heat in the oven, then mid-sentence stopped talking. One hand gripped the edge of the stainless steel counter, the other pressed against his chest. His brow furrowed, not in panic but as if something didn't make sense. Then his knees buckled. The sound of his body hitting the floor carried above the kitchen clatter, loud enough to draw heads from the dining room. 2 nursing students sitting near the counter rushed to his side. They found him unresponsive, his breaths shallow and irregular. One began chest compressions. The other called out to the staff to dial 911. A waiter propped the front door open for the paramedics. The warm scent of curry now mingled with a sharper, colder smell of fear. Seattle Fire's medics arrived in under 10 minutes. They moved quickly, attaching monitors, preparing the defibrillator, trying everything they could to bring him back. For nearly half an hour, they worked under the fluorescent glare of the kitchen lights. At 8:14 p.m., the lead medic gave a small shake of the head. The declaration was made: time of death. The room fell silent in that way restaurants rarely do. No clinking of plates, no murmured conversation. Just a few customers holding their takeout bags, frozen in place, unsure whether to stay or leave. On the surface, it looked like tragedy had struck without warning. The preliminary report listed cardiac arrest. There were no bruises, no signs of choking, no external trauma. The Seattle police weren't called. This was treated as a medical emergency, nothing more. The next day, the Golden Curry House stayed closed. A handwritten sign taped to the inside of the glass read, "Closed for family reasons." Customers brought flowers, tucking them between the door handle and the frame. Inside, the stainless steel counters had been wiped down, but the faint aroma of cumin and roasted garlic still lingered. No one outside the family had seen much of Sonia Mehta in the hours after her husband's death. At 34, Sonia carried herself with the practiced poise of her former modeling career in Mumbai: perfectly styled hair, deliberate movements, a smile that could be turned on and off like a stage light. The couple had married only 2 years earlier, in a small ceremony attended by friends and a handful of loyal customers. While Arjun kept to the kitchen, Sonia preferred the upscale boutiques of downtown Seattle and weekends in the VIP lounges of exclusive clubs. Friends said they were an unlikely match. He was frugal, content to reinvest earnings into the restaurant. She had tastes that could empty a joint bank account in a single shopping trip. It was 2 days after Arjun's death, on a Thursday morning, when Sonia walked into the Pacific Northwest Insurance Group's office in the downtown financial district. She was dressed in a tailored beige pantsuit over a silk blouse, hair pinned back, carrying a slim leather folder. Inside were neatly organized documents: her husband's death certificate request, marriage license, and a $150,000 life insurance policy purchased just 4 months earlier. She asked the claims officer about processing times, signatures, and whether the accidental death clause applied. Not once did she ask about the coroner's findings. Not once did she mention the funeral. Paul Renwick, the claims officer with 27 years in the business, later told investigators her demeanor stood out. Calm, focused, more like someone closing a real estate deal than a widow settling her husband's affairs. He followed standard protocol. When a relatively young policyholder dies suddenly, and the policy is new, especially with a double indemnity clause, the claim gets flagged. That flag sent the file to the desk of Detective Daniel Brooks with the Seattle Police Department's Major Crimes Section. Brooks had a reputation for looking twice at natural deaths that didn't quite fit. 17 years in homicide had taught him that some of the most deliberate murders come dressed as medical misfortune. The first thing he noted, Arjun was 36 with no chronic health issues on record. The restaurant work kept him on his feet all day, and there were no hospital visits in his history. The policy, purchased in April, named Sonia as the sole beneficiary. The double indemnity clause meant if his death was ruled accidental, she'd receive $300,000. Brooks didn't have a crime scene to work with. The kitchen had been cleaned, customers and staff sent home. But he did have one advantage, the restaurant security cameras, a modest system Arjun had installed after a break-in years earlier. When Brooks loaded the footage from the day of Arjun's death, a detail caught his attention. At 5:11 p.m., Sonia entered through the front, carrying a glossy shopping bag. She rarely came to the restaurant before closing. More unusual, she went straight into the kitchen. The cameras there weren't perfect. Grainy, black and white, fixed high in the corner. But it was enough to see her moving near the prep station, where the naan dough was resting. For nearly 15 minutes, her body blocked the view of the counter. When she left at 5:26, she carried the same shopping bag out with her. Brooks paused the footage and leaned back. There was no proof of wrongdoing in those minutes, yet. But they sat inside the exact window when the first batch of naan was prepared, the same batch Arjun tasted before he collapsed. At that point, Brooks didn't know about Ricin. He didn't know about the agricultural supplier in Oregon, or the latex gloves in the trunk of Sonia's Lexus. Those pieces were still scattered far from one another. But he did know this. In a city where kitchens never stop, the Golden Curry House had gone quiet far too suddenly. Detective Daniel Brooks didn't make arrests based on hunches. In 17 years with Seattle PD's Major Crimes Section, he'd learned that instincts might point you in the right direction, but you still needed evidence that could stand up in court. And in this case, so far, all he had was a flag on a life insurance claim and 15 minutes of grainy kitchen footage. The next step was background work, the kind that didn't make headlines but often determined whether an investigation even made it past the first week. Brooks pulled the standard records: marriage certificate, financial disclosures, business licenses, known associates, and any prior police contacts. He also ran both Arjun and Sonia's names through the department's case database. Arjun's record came back clean. Sonia's name didn't hit any criminal files, but it did surface in a different kind of report. 2 years earlier, shortly after she'd moved from Los Angeles to Seattle, Sonia had been mentioned in an intelligence memo circulated to local precincts. The memo was about a downtown nightclub called the Velvet Lotus, a high-end venue with a polished front and a shadowy reputation. The club's owner, Rajiv Kapoor, had been the subject of multiple financial crimes investigations that never made it to trial. Surveillance photos in the file showed Sonia at private events there. Nothing illegal in itself, but worth noting. Brooks jotted the name down and underlined it. The Velvet Lotus wasn't far from the Mehta's apartment, and it wasn't the kind of place where you just dropped in unless you had connections. For now, though, he focused on Sonia's movements in the days around Arjun's death. The insurance policy had been purchased in April, barely 4 months earlier, from Pacific Life Northwest. The double indemnity clause meant she stood to gain $300,000 if the death was ruled accidental. In the agent's notes, Brooks saw that Sonia had attended the meeting with Arjun, asked specific questions about payout timelines, and had been listed as the sole beneficiary. He also noted something else: the policy's effective date. It kicked in on April 15th, 4 months to the day before Arjun collapsed. On paper, that could still be a coincidence. But in Brooks' experience, big payouts on young, healthy people who die unexpectedly, just after a policy becomes active, were rarely random. The next morning, Brooks visited the Golden Curry House in person. The restaurant was still closed, the closed for family reasons sign curling slightly at the edges from the summer humidity. Through the glass, he could see the tables pushed together, chairs stacked. A faint scent of spices still clung to the air. Inside, Maya Thompson, the sous chef, agreed to talk. She'd been with Arjun for nearly 3 years, starting as a line cook before he promoted her. She spoke about that Tuesday night, how it had started like any other, how Arjun had been in good spirits. But when Brooks asked about Sonia's visit to the kitchen, her tone shifted. "She doesn't like being back there," Maya said. "Too hot, too noisy." That night, she came in with a shopping bag, said she had a surprise for Arjun. She stood near the prep station for a while. I was chopping vegetables, so I wasn't watching her every second, but she kept glancing around like she was waiting for someone to walk in. Brooks pressed her gently. Did you see her touch anything? Maya hesitated. Her hands were near the dough container. I didn't see her put anything in it, but she was close. Then she left quick. Still had the bag. The dough container. Brooks' eyes went back to the kitchen footage in his mind. Sonia's body blocking the prep counter for most of her visit. If the cause of death really had been cardiac arrest, none of this mattered. But the official cause wasn't in yet, and Brooks had already placed a call to the King County Medical Examiner's office requesting a full toxicology panel. 3 days later, the callback came from Dr. Elaine Porter, the deputy medical examiner. Her voice was calm, but the words were anything but routine. We were running the standard tox screen, she began, but one of my lab techs noticed something unusual in the tissue samples. Significant cell necrosis, more than we'd expect for a typical cardiac event. She explained that the tech, suspecting a toxin, ran targeted tests. The results came back positive for ricin, a highly potent protein toxin derived from castor beans. Even a few milligrams could be lethal. Death usually came within 36 to 72 hours of ingestion. There was no antidote. Brooks knew ricin by reputation. It wasn't the kind of thing you stumbled across by accident. In the U.S., it was classified as a select agent under federal law, meaning possession without authorization could carry bioterrorism charges. The fact that it showed up in a Seattle restaurant kitchen was more than unusual. It was dangerous. Dr. Porter added one more detail. Based on concentration levels in Arjun's blood and stomach contents, ingestion likely occurred 1 to 2 hours before his collapse. That matched the window when he'd sampled the first batch of naan dough that evening. Brooks asked the obvious question. How does someone even get ricin? In raw form from castor beans, Porter replied. They're legal to buy for certain agricultural or ornamental uses, but refining them into purified ricin? That takes intent, equipment, and knowledge. It was enough for Brooks to reclassify the case from a sudden death to a suspicious death, and to treat the Golden Curry house as a potential crime scene. The forensic team went in the next morning. Wearing gloves and masks, they swabbed every surface of the prep area. Stainless steel mixing bowls, utensils, the dough container, each sample sealed and labeled. A quick field test on one swab from the inside of the dough mixing bowl lit up positive for ricin residue. That was the first physical link between the toxin in Arjun's body and the kitchen where Sonia had been standing. Brooks kept the circle tight. The fewer people who knew about the ricin, the better. If word leaked, panic could spread, and the investigation could collapse under outside pressure. But privately, he began mapping a sequence of events. April, life insurance policy purchased. Midsummer, increased financial strain on the Mehta's accounts. August 14th, Sonia in the kitchen during dough prep, shortly before Arjun eats from that batch. Within hours, Arjun collapses and dies. 2 days later, Sonia files claim. The sequence was too clean to ignore. One detail still nagged at him, Rajiv Kapoor. Brooks didn't know yet what role, if any, Kapoor had played. But the nightclub owner had resources, connections, and a past link to Sonia. And in Brooks' experience, money and opportunity often traveled together. He reached out to a contact in the financial crimes unit, asking for a deep dive on the Mehta's bank activity for the last 6 months. It took less than a week to get results. In the records was a transaction from August 12th, 2 days before Arjun's death. A withdrawal of $3,000 from the Mehta's joint account, followed the next day by a deposit of the exact amount into a business account registered to the Velvet Lotus. There was no invoice. No event booking in the club's calendar. Nothing in the staffing logs to suggest a private function. When Brooks read that, he knew the loose thread had just turned into a rope. And if he pulled hard enough, it might lead him straight to whoever had planned Arjun Mehta's death. Detective Daniel Brooks wasn't the type to believe in lucky breaks. In his experience, what looked like luck was usually the result of patient work, pulling on one thread until it led you to another. The $3,000 transaction linking Sonia Mehta to Rajiv Kapoor was that next thread. A straight line, on paper, between the widow of a man who had just died from one of the rarest toxins in the world, and a nightclub owner with a file in the department's watch but can't yet touch folder. Brooks knew better than to confront either of them directly. He needed more, something that couldn't be explained away as coincidence or business as usual. So he shifted his focus to how ricin could have entered Arjun Mehta's kitchen. The King County Medical Examiner's report had already confirmed ingestion occurred 1 to 2 hours before Arjun collapsed. The batch of naan dough prepared that evening, the same batch Sonia was near in the footage, tested positive for ricin residue. Brooks began thinking backward from that moment. Someone had to obtain castor beans, extract the toxin, transport it without attracting attention, and deliver it in a form small enough to hide but potent enough to kill. That meant planning, and planning left traces. He reached out to the RCMP's National Security Division in Canada. While the U.S. had its own federal tracking, the Canadians had recently run joint operations on ricin awareness and might have supplier lists or flag purchases. Within a week, a lead came back from the Oregon Department of Agriculture. In April, the same month Sonia's life insurance policy with Arjun took effect, an order had been placed for 6 kilograms of castor beans from an agricultural wholesaler in Eugene. The sale was registered under the name Anita Joshi, with documentation claiming the beans were for cosmetic manufacturing. The store owner remembered the buyer, a woman in casual clothes, baseball cap pulled low, who paid in cash. His description, slim build, medium brown skin, long dark hair, could have fit hundreds of women in the Pacific Northwest. But when Brooks obtained surveillance footage from the store's parking lot, the resolution, though grainy, was enough to pick out the shape of her face when she looked up briefly. It wasn't proof beyond doubt, but to Brooks it was Sonia. There was another problem for her: the vehicle. She hadn't driven her white Lexus down to Oregon. Instead, the plate in the video belonged to a gray compact sedan rented from a lot in Tacoma the day before the purchase. The rental agreement had been signed with an Oregon driver's license in the name Anita Joshi. The photo on the ID was blurred, but the facial structure matched Sonia's. She'd gone to the trouble of using a fake ID, a rental car, and cash payment. To Brooks, that screamed one thing: premeditation. Next came the Lexus. It had been impounded after Arjun's death, but until now it hadn't been a priority for a full forensic sweep. Brooks signed off on the warrant and had the crime lab go over every inch. The results gave him exactly what he needed. A pair of disposable latex gloves found in the trunk tested positive for ricin residue and trace wheat flour particles. A small clear plastic food container, wedged in the side compartment, held the same combination. Brooks imagined the scene in his head: Sonia in her kitchen at home, gloves on, handling a powder refined from castor beans, portioning it into something small enough to carry unnoticed. Then hours later, standing in Arjun's restaurant kitchen with that same container, waiting until no one was watching to tip it into the dough he would later taste. But possession and opportunity weren't enough. In court you needed to show intent. That came from her laptop. The cybercrimes unit recovered deleted browser history dating back to February. The searches were clinical, methodical. How to extract ricin from castor beans. Purifying ricin at home. Delayed onset symptoms ricin ingestion. How much ricin to kill an adult. Each search was time-stamped and matched gaps in her visible history, meaning they'd been deliberately deleted. The recovered pages included detailed step-by-step guides, diagrams of separation methods, and notes on how symptoms could be delayed long enough for a suspect to leave the scene. The planning timeline now stretched back at least 6 months, 2 months before the policy was signed. Brooks didn't keep all of this to himself. He looped in the county prosecutor's office, giving them a running brief. Samantha Cole, the deputy prosecutor assigned to review the file, agreed it was moving toward a homicide case with a financial motive. But there was still the matter of Rajiv Kapoor. When Brooks dug into his bank records, more patterns emerged. Rajiv's club, the Velvet Lotus, had no record of a private booking matching the $3,000 deposit. Staff schedules for that week showed no event setup, no catering orders. On paper, the deposit had no business explanation. The relationship between Sonia and Rajiv became the next focal point. Witness interviews from club regulars and staff painted a picture of familiarity. She visited multiple times a week, stayed in VIP areas, and often left through staff-only exits. That level of access suggested more than casual acquaintance. Brooks decided it was time to talk to Rajiv, but in a way that wouldn't spook him into clamming up. The first interview was light, under the pretense of clarifying Sonia's background. Rajiv claimed they were friends, that the $3,000 was a deposit for a private event that later fell through. Brooks let him talk, noting the easy confidence in his tone, the way he kept his answers just inside the bounds of plausibility. The second interview, a week later, tightened the screws slightly. Brooks mentioned the ricin, not accusing, just inquiring whether Rajiv had heard about it. He watched the man's expression shift almost imperceptibly at the word. Rajiv still denied any involvement, kept insisting the payment was legitimate. But Brooks knew the game. Sometimes you didn't need a confession right away. You needed to show the suspect that the walls were getting smaller. And for that, the next step was confronting Sonia, carefully. Instead of a formal interrogation, he requested a voluntary interview. Sonia arrived with the same poise she'd shown at the insurance office, dressed immaculately, her answers measured. She denied buying castor beans, denied owning gloves like the ones in her car, and said her internet searches were probably health-related because she'd been reading about toxins in food. Brooks let her speak. He didn't push hard, not yet. Because the truth was, he didn't need her to incriminate herself in that room. He needed her to feel the pressure just enough to start making mistakes. By late September, the case file was thick. Surveillance linking Sonia to the kitchen before ingestion. Forensic proof of ricin in the naan dough. Purchase of castor beans under a false identity. Rental car records. Gloves and container in her vehicle with matching residues. Deleted searches showing knowledge and planning. Financial link to Rajiv Kapoor with no legitimate explanation. And still, Brooks suspected he hadn't seen the most important crack yet. Because in cases like this, the real break often came not from the evidence itself, but from the moment two people who had been working together decided they might be better off saving themselves. He just needed to make Sonia and Rajiv wonder who would talk first. By the time September rolled into October, Detective Daniel Brooks had everything he needed to take this case into the charging phase, except for one thing. He still didn't know exactly how much Rajiv Kapoor knew, or how far he was willing to go to protect himself. From the outside, Rajiv's life didn't look like it had changed much since Arjun Mehta's death. The Velvet Lotus still opened every weekend, the VIP booths still filled with Seattle's well-heeled night crowd, and Rajiv still greeted regulars with that polished half-smile that never quite reached his eyes. But Brooks knew better. He'd seen it before, the way a man starts carrying tension in his shoulders, the way he glances just a second too long when a uniform passes by. Those were the microfractures. And Brooks' job was to widen them. He called Rajiv in for a third interview, this time with a slightly different setup. No casual pretext. No easy questions. Instead, Brooks walked into the interview room carrying a brown accordion file so thick it barely closed. He didn't sit right away, he let the silence stretch, laying photographs out one by one across the table. First, the still from the Oregon Agricultural Suppliers parking lot. A woman in a baseball cap, loading sacks of castor beans into a gray rental car. Then, the rental agreement with the Anita Joshi license. The forensic report on the gloves and container from Sonia's Lexus. The bank statement showing the $3,000 withdrawal from the Mehta's account and the deposit into the Velvet Lotus business account the next day. Rajiv didn't say a word, but Brooks saw the telltale signs. The shallow exhale, the way his fingers began to tap lightly against the table. Here's the thing, Rajiv, Brooks began, his voice steady. All of this points to a plan. A plan that started months before Arjun died. Now, you can tell me your role in it, or you can wait until Sonia decides to tell hers first. Rajiv's lawyer, a tall, silver-haired man in a charcoal suit, shifted in his chair. Detective, if you're making accusations. I'm laying out facts, Brooks cut in. And here's another one. There's no record of a booking at your club for the date you claim that deposit was for. Rajiv leaned back, eyes fixed on the photographs, his jaw tightening. After a long pause, he said quietly, I want to talk to my attorney alone. Brooks left them to it, stepping into the hall. It wasn't a confession, but it was movement. The kind of movement that meant a door was about to open, if he timed it right. 2 days later, the call came. Rajiv's lawyer wanted to clarify his client's position, but only if the conversation was considered under the framework of a potential cooperation agreement. The prosecutor, Samantha Cole, agreed. If Rajiv could help lock in a first-degree murder conviction against Sonia, she'd consider a reduced sentence. When Brooks sat down across from him again, Rajiv's tone was different. Less confident. More deliberate. She came to me in April, he said. Told me she wanted out of the marriage. Said she couldn't just leave because she'd lose too much. She told me about the insurance policy, about the payout if Arjun died under certain circumstances. He described how Sonia framed the $3,000 as a sign of commitment to the plan, not payment for services but proof she was serious. At first he claimed he dismissed it, but she kept pressing, hinting at things she could say about his business if he didn't help her. It wasn't worth the trouble to fight her, he said. So I stayed close. I listened. But I didn't touch the stuff. I didn't put anything in that kitchen. Brooks didn't believe the hands-clean part for a second. But he didn't need to, not yet. What mattered was that Rajiv had just confirmed the existence of a murder plan. That statement could be corroborated with physical evidence and used to dismantle Sonia's defense. The challenge now was strategic. How to confront Sonia with enough weight to make her talk without tipping her into complete silence. Brooks arranged a second voluntary interview. This time, instead of the polite, open-ended questions, he laid the timeline out for her in precise detail. April 15th, the insurance policy starts. April 22nd, purchase of 6 kilos of castor beans in Eugene under a fake name. August 12th, $3,000 pulled from your joint account. August 14th, you're in the kitchen standing over the dough container 15 minutes before the first batch goes in the oven. That batch tests positive for ricin. Arjun tastes it. 2 hours later, he's dead. Sonia's expression didn't change much, but Brooks noticed her posture, the way she crossed her legs tighter, the faint tightening at the corners of her mouth. That's a very creative story, detective, she said evenly. But you have no proof I put anything in that dough. Brooks leaned forward just enough to close the space between them. Maybe not on video. But I have your laptop history, the searches you deleted. I have the gloves and the container from your car. And now, I have Rajiv's statement. That was the first flicker, a quick, sharp glance before she schooled her expression again. Brooks didn't press further. He simply gathered his papers, stood, and said, think about who's going to tell the jury their version first. Outside the interview room, Brooks and Samantha Cole reviewed the situation. They both knew what came next: indictment. The physical evidence, the financial motive, the corroborating statement from Rajiv, it was enough to take to a grand jury. But Brooks wasn't done yet. He wanted one more layer of insurance, one more piece of the puzzle that would make the case airtight. That meant going back to the beginning and talking to anyone who'd been in that kitchen on the day of Arjun's death. Maya Thompson, the sous chef, agreed to a second interview. This time, Brooks asked her to walk through the afternoon minute by minute. She described Sonia's arrival, the way she moved to the prep station, her restless scanning of the room. And then she mentioned something she hadn't before. After she left the kitchen, she stopped by Arjun's office. Put a little box on his desk. Said it was a gift. Brooks raised an eyebrow. You see what was inside? No. But she didn't hang around to talk, which was weird for her. Usually she'd make a big deal out of giving something. The gift box wasn't evidence, not yet. But it was another anomaly, another action in those final hours that could be layered into the timeline. By the end of that week, Brooks' case board looked like something out of a procedural drama. Photographs of Sonia and Rajiv connected by red string to bank records, to rental agreements, to grainy surveillance stills. In the center was a photo of Arjun, smiling in his white chef's jacket, completely unaware that the people closest to him were about to end his life. For Brooks, that was always the worst part. Knowing how many of his cases didn't begin with strangers in the dark, but with someone the victim had every reason to trust. And in this case, that trust had been weaponized, measured, and delivered one spoonful at a time. By the time the leaves began to turn in late October, Detective Daniel Brooks knew the investigation had reached the point where hesitation could hurt more than help. The file on Sonia Mehta was no longer a collection of scattered leads. It was a single, unbroken chain from motive to method to execution. Still, Brooks wasn't interested in handing over good enough. In a courtroom, good enough left cracks for a defense attorney to pry open. He wanted this case sealed so tightly that no argument, no cross-examination could shake it. That meant reinforcing every link in the chain one last time. The forensic reports were already solid. Ricin in the naan dough and Arjun Mehta's stomach contents, on the latex gloves and food container found in Sonia's Lexus. But Brooks wanted a direct scientific match. Something the jury could see on a screen and understand instantly. He called the state crime lab and asked for a comparative signature analysis. Ricin, once refined, still carries trace chemical markers tied to the specific batch of castor beans it was extracted from. The lab ran side-by-side chromatography tests on samples from the dough, the gloves, and a small residue recovered from the seams of the plastic container. The result? Identical chemical profiles across all three. And more than that, those same markers matched residue taken from a castor bean sack seized in Eugene, Oregon, during an unrelated agricultural inspection. That sack had come from the same supplier Anita Joshi bought from in April. It was the kind of direct line that closed a lot of defense doors. Brooks also wanted to lock down Sonia's timeline on the day of the murder. Cell tower data had already placed her near the Golden Curry house between 5:12 p.m. and 5:27 p.m., exactly when Maya Thompson saw her in the kitchen. But to make the jury believe it, he needed to pair that digital evidence with something tangible. The answer came from an unlikely source, a parking garage security camera across the street from the restaurant. The footage wasn't high quality, but at 5:09 p.m., a white Lexus sedan matching Sonia's rolled in. 3 minutes later, she was visible on the street-level exit camera, crossing toward the restaurant's front door, carrying a glossy shopping bag. At 5:28 p.m., she was on the same camera again, bag still in hand, walking back toward the garage. It wasn't the act itself caught on tape, but it was the bookend. Combined with the kitchen footage, it gave the jury a clear visual frame. She went in with the bag, stayed near the prep station, came out with the bag. By early November, Brooks and prosecutor Samantha Cole convened for the final review before presenting to the grand jury. Cole was meticulous. She wanted to anticipate every angle the defense might try. What if she says the ricin could have come from someone else in the kitchen? Cole asked. Brooks shook his head. Dough was made in small batches. Only that one tested positive. No one else was in that kitchen alone during that window. And her gloves, her container, they're the delivery mechanism. What about Rajiv? She pressed. You think the defense will try to pin it all on him? Probably, Brooks said. That's why we keep his cooperation in play. He places her as the planner. And his statement about the $3,000 commitment? That's motive and intent right there. The grand jury hearing was short. The presentation was clean. Lab reports, surveillance clips, financial records, Rajiv's recorded statement. When the vote came back, the indictment was unanimous. First-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and unlawful possession of a controlled toxin. Sonia was arrested at her apartment 2 days later. Brooks was there when the team moved in. She didn't resist, didn't cry. She simply stood in her tailored blazer, wrists held out for the cuffs as if she'd been expecting this moment for weeks. The arraignment was the first time Sonia and Rajiv were in the same room since the investigation began. Brooks watched them from the gallery. Sonia didn't look at him. Rajiv glanced once, then away. The air between them was brittle, a silent acknowledgement that whatever alliance they'd had was over. In the weeks before trial, Cole's office filed motions to admit all digital and physical evidence, as well as Rajiv's cooperation statement. Sonia's defense team countered hard, trying to suppress the laptop searches as illegally recovered, the gloves and container as circumstantial, even the chemical signature match as inconclusive science. The judge denied every motion. The case was going to trial with the evidence intact. Brooks knew that the courtroom battle would hinge not just on science but on story. Jurors might not understand every detail of chromatography, but they'd understand a sequence of actions they could visualize. Cole's opening plan was to walk them through the case like a film. The insurance policy in April, the castor beans in Oregon, the financial link to Rajiv, the kitchen visit in August, the collapse, the gloves, the searches. It was methodical. And it mirrored the way Brooks had built the case from the ground up. In the final prep meeting, Cole asked him, "You ready to testify?" Brooks gave a small smile. "Been ready since the day I saw her on that kitchen footage." For him, this wasn't about winning. It was about making sure Arjun Mehta's death didn't become just another sudden heart failure on paper. He'd seen too many of those slip by in the early days of his career, before he learned to look for the quiet, deliberate ways people could kill. The trial date was set for January. And as the winter rains swept over Seattle, Brooks found himself going back to the Golden Curry House one last time before the testimony began. The saffron paint was fading, the tables stacked in the corner, the air faintly scented with spices that would never be cooked there again. It was a reminder of why he did the work, and why, in a matter of weeks, 12 strangers in a jury box would hear the whole story. January in Seattle is a season of gray skies and constant drizzle, the kind of weather that makes courthouse steps slick and the air feel heavy. On the morning of State of Washington versus Sonia Mehta, the drizzle turned into a cold, steady rain that seemed to slow the entire downtown block outside the King County Superior Court. Inside, the warmth of the courtroom felt oddly at odds with the case about to unfold. The gallery filled early, reporters, sketch artists, and members of the local community who had followed the case since the first whispers that Arjun Mehta's heart attack wasn't natural at all. Sonia sat at the defense table, perfectly composed in a navy suit, her dark hair pulled back in a low chignon. She didn't look toward the gallery, didn't search for a friendly face. Rajiv Kapoor sat at a separate table with his attorney, his posture rigid, eyes forward. The two didn't acknowledge each other. Opening statements. Prosecutor Samantha Cole rose first. Her voice was even, deliberate. She began not with the ricin or the insurance policy, but with a portrait of Arjun Mehta, the immigrant who built a restaurant from nothing, who became a fixture in his neighborhood, who knew his customers by name. Then she shifted to the facts. In April of last year, she told the jury, the defendant purchased a life insurance policy on her husband for $150,000, with a double indemnity clause for accidental death. 4 months later, he collapsed and died in his own kitchen. It was not an accident. She outlined the evidence they would hear: the purchase of castor beans under a false identity, the rental car, the gloves and container with ricin residue, the deleted laptop searches, and Rajiv Kapoor's testimony about the plan and the $3,000 sign of commitment. The defense countered with a very different narrative. Sonia's attorney, a sharp-featured man named Paul Granger, painted her as a woman trapped in a failing marriage to a controlling husband, manipulated by Rajiv Kapoor, a man with a history of criminal dealings, into actions she didn't fully understand. He hinted that Rajiv might have orchestrated the poisoning himself, using Sonia as an unknowing pawn. It was clear from the start: the defense would aim to create just enough doubt to fracture the prosecution's chain. The evidence. The first week was all about the physical trail. Forensic experts testified about the presence of ricin in the naan dough, in Arjun's stomach contents, and on the gloves and container from Sonia's car. A state toxicologist walked the jury through the chemical signature match, explaining how the ricin from all three sources bore identical markers, and how those markers matched residue from a sack of castor beans sold to Anita Joshi in Eugene. Brooks took the stand to explain the investigation's progression. He walked the jury through the kitchen footage, pointing out Sonia's body position blocking the prep station camera, and paired that with the parking garage video showing her arrival and departure with the shopping bag. When Granger cross-examined him, the questions came sharp. "Detective, you never actually saw my client put anything into that dough, correct?" Brooks didn't flinch. "Correct. But the forensic evidence shows the dough was contaminated with ricin. Only Ms. Mehta had unsupervised access to that dough in the relevant time window. And she's the one who had gloves and a container with the same ricin in her car." The digital trail. A cybercrimes analyst demonstrated how deleted browsing history could still be recovered. The jury saw screenshots of Sonia's laptop searches: how to extract ricin from castor beans, delayed onset ricin symptoms, ricin lethal dose. Each bore a date and timestamp, many from months before Arjun's death. The defense tried to dismiss them as morbid curiosity, suggesting she'd read about toxins in the news and researched further without intent to use them. Cole countered by showing how the searches clustered in the weeks surrounding the insurance policy purchase. The money link. The Financial Crimes Unit presented the August withdrawal of $3,000 from the Mehta's joint account and the matching deposit into the Velvet Lotus business account the next day. There was no invoice, no record of an event booking. Staff logs showed no preparation for a private event. Granger tried to argue the payment could have been for personal matters between Sonia and Rajiv unrelated to the restaurant or Arjun's death. But the next witness would make that argument harder to sell. Rajiv Kapoor's testimony. Rajiv entered the witness box in a dark suit, his eyes scanning the courtroom but never settling on Sonia. Under Cole's questioning, he admitted their past romantic involvement and described Sonia approaching him in April with a plan to kill Arjun for the insurance payout. "She said the money could help expand my business," Rajiv testified. "She called the $3,000 a sign of commitment." Cole asked if he'd ever handled the ricin. He said no, that Sonia made it clear she'd take care of it. He claimed he stayed close to avoid her turning on him in other matters, but never put anything in the kitchen. The defense attacked his credibility hard. Granger pointed out Rajiv's own history, his incentive to shift blame, and the reduced sentence he was hoping for. Rajiv held his ground, but the jury's faces were unreadable. The turning point. The most quietly devastating testimony came from Maya Thompson. She described seeing Sonia in the kitchen that day, her hands near the dough container, her restless scanning of the room. She also recalled Sonia stopping by Arjun's office afterward, leaving what looked like a gift box on his desk without conversation. Cole asked Maya what stood out most. "It was like she was waiting for a moment when no one was watching," Maya said. "And when she found it, she didn't waste time. It wasn't a smoking gun. But it was human detail, the kind jurors remembered." Closing arguments. Cole's closing was methodical. She laid out the timeline in sequence, showing how each piece fit. The policy, the purchase of the beans, the preparation of the ricin, the financial link to Rajiv, the kitchen access, the contaminated dough, the collapse, the gloves and container, the deleted searches. "This was not an accident," she said, her voice steady. "It was a deliberate act, planned for months, executed with precision, and motivated by greed." Granger told the jury they didn't have to like Sonia to see the holes in the state's case. He warned against trusting Rajiv's word, against assuming coincidence meant conspiracy. "If there's reasonable doubt in your mind," he said, "you must vote not guilty." Deliberation. The jury began deliberations on a rainy Thursday morning. Brooks stayed in his office, resisting the urge to pace. By Friday afternoon, the call came, verdict reached. The rain was still falling when the bailiff called everyone back into the courtroom. The jury filed in, their expressions unreadable, each step heavy with the weight of what they were about to say. Sonia Mehta sat perfectly still at the defense table, hands folded on the wood, her gaze fixed straight ahead. Rajiv Kapoor, at his separate table, kept his head slightly lowered, avoiding her line of sight. Detective Daniel Brooks sat behind the prosecution, his notebook closed, pen resting across it. No more questions to write down now, just answers to hear. The foreperson stood, a folded sheet of paper in hand. The judge's voice was calm, almost soft. Madam Foreperson, has the jury reached a verdict? Yes, Your Honor. The verdict: on the charge of first-degree murder of Arjun Mehta, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, guilty. On the charge of unlawful possession of a controlled toxin, guilty. Sonia didn't flinch. No gasp, no tears, no whispered words to her attorney. She simply closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, as though confirming to herself that this was the outcome she'd been expecting all along. Rajiv's verdict followed: conspiracy to commit murder, guilty. Accessory after the fact, guilty. His cooperation agreement meant the sentencing would be lighter, but the conviction was still there, stamped in the court record. Sentencing. A week later, they were back in the same room for sentencing. The families of both men, Arjun's in person, Rajiv's on the other side of the aisle, filled the gallery. Arjun's sister spoke first, her voice shaking but steady enough to say what she'd been carrying for months. My brother trusted her, she said, looking directly at Sonia. And she used that trust to kill him in the place he loved most, his own kitchen. Samantha Cole spoke next, urging the court to consider not just the act itself, but the months of planning, the deliberate acquisition of a toxin that had no purpose except to kill, and the calculated way Sonia positioned herself to profit. The judge's words were measured but firm. This was not a crime of passion. It was a crime of patience, planning, and precision, a calculated betrayal for financial gain. Sonia was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 25 years, plus additional years for the conspiracy and toxin charges, served consecutively. Rajiv Kapoor received 20 years, reduced from a potential life sentence due to his cooperation. Aftermath. The Golden Curry House never reopened. The saffron-colored walls faded under the Seattle rain until the building was eventually sold, its interior gutted and rebuilt into a different kind of restaurant entirely. For those who had known Arjun, walking past the corner still stirred the memory of his voice, his laugh, the smell of naan baking in the oven. Detective Brooks closed the file with a rare sense of closure. Not satisfaction, closure. There was no victory in proving that someone had poisoned their own spouse. But there was justice, and sometimes that had to be enough. Reflection. In the weeks after sentencing, reporters moved on to other stories. The headlines about Ricin in a Seattle kitchen faded from the front page, replaced by new scandals, new tragedies. But for Brooks, the case stayed in the quiet part of his mind where the most intricate murders lived. Not for their sensationalism, but for the cold patience behind them. The ricin had been the perfect weapon in Sonia's eyes. Invisible in food, with symptoms delayed long enough to give her distance from the scene. But it had also been her undoing. Ricin left a trail for those who knew how to look. In the dough, in the gloves, in the container in her trunk, in the chemical fingerprint matching a sack of beans from hundreds of miles away. Every case had a lesson. This one's was simple. The smallest details, a shopping bag in a grainy camera frame, a few minutes alone in a kitchen, a $3,000 deposit, could unravel a plan months in the making. Closing voice. In the end, Brooks would say later, it wasn't about catching her in the act. It was about showing the jury how each step, every choice she made, lined up into one straight path to Arjun's death. And once you see that path, you can't unsee it. The jury had seen it. The court had seen it. And now, the door had closed behind Sonia Mehta for what would almost certainly be the rest of her life. The Golden Curry House was gone. But the case remained. A reminder that even in the warmest, most familiar places, someone can be measuring out trust one poison spoonful at a time.